The Trump Justice Department seems to leave no stone unturned when it comes to covering up any evidence of Donald Trump's possible alleged crimes. Let me tell you the story of Taylor Taranto, a pardoned January 6 rioter who seemed to aspire to higher crimes. Now, this was a fellow who was caught on U.S. Capitol Police security video, and he was ultimately charged in that case, but before anything could happen, this is what he looked like on that date, he was pardoned, along with a lot of other people. Now, let's talk about what it is that he aspired to do, and also just what lengths the Trump Justice Department went in his case to cover up and change history. But first, let's remind you, hit that subscription button, make us the biggest as well as the best legal analysis and political analysis channel out there. Now, I'm going to tell you his story by telling you about three different cases. His case involved him showing up in the neighborhood where former President Obama was living. Merrick Garland was the Attorney General, and they have gotten around now to the point where this guy was convicted, is going to be sentenced. But there are a couple other things to think about too. Let's remember the Brett Kavanaugh would-be assassin. That was someone who was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and that was Sophie Rosk, and she was charged with attempted assassination of a Supreme Court justice. She showed up with a Glock 17 pistol, a knife, restraining ties, and turned herself in to the U.S. Marshals who were stationed, as they normally are, in front of Justice Kavanaugh's house. However, Trump Attorney General Pam Bondi was outraged that Roski did not get 3 decades for this. And the judge departed downwards. That's the term for when the judge goes past the lower range of the guidelines in the sentencing. And the reason the judge gave was that the judge disagreed with the government, claiming that only the U.S. Marshals stopped the attack by their presence because Roski turned themselves in. And also, the judge pointed out that a Trump executive order would have forced Roski to be housed without regard to being a transgender in status. No doubt something that made the Trump Justice Department particularly vehement, as nothing excites them more than an example of transgender people allegedly committing any crimes at all. But the judge wanted to take that into account too for departing downwards to that sentence. Now, next, something else to compare it to was this fellow Ryan Ruth, the Trump would-be assassin on a golf course where he was hiding with a loaded gun and expressed intent that if he was caught, it probably was because his attempt failed and he was hoping to have assassinated Trump. Garland was the Attorney General there. Now, by comparison, the defendant in this case that I'm talking about, who was charged with heading to former President Obama's residence with guns, 400 rounds of ammo, he only got charged with possession of firearms charges. Garland was the Attorney General. Now, we can talk more about why Attorney General Garland might have been more fired up about charging someone trying to assassinate an opposing party presidential candidate. That's what Trump was then, because they want to look nonpartisan. There's nothing that is more appealing to an institutionalist than the chance to show that the institution is really objective and is nonpartisan. Kind of like the equivalent of how fired up Trump's DOJ gets anytime there's an opportunity to claim that transgenders or liberals have done some kind of crime. Now, maybe he was particularly fired up over Kavanaugh because Kavanaugh's a judge, like Garland was for most of his career. But here's what all of these have in common. They all had sentencing memorandums, because that's what's always done in criminal cases. A memorandum is done quite thorough, talking about the characteristics of the defendant, prior criminal history, characteristics of the crime, what was going on with circumstances, and they're relying heavily upon a memo prepared by the probation department. It's called a pre-sentencing report. All that comes together in every case. But in this case, with the guy in the neighborhood of President Obama's house, it's a great example of how well the Trump administration understands, like all authoritarian regimes, that you cannot allow even the slightest glimpse of truth to shine through, because just a little glimpse can bring down the big lie. And in this case, telling the truth cost 2 career prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office may be their job, but certainly cost them the ability to serve as prosecutors on this significant case. This was the U.S. versus Taylor Taranto, and he was convicted by a Trump appointee of bringing these illegal guns near President Obama's Washington, D.C. residence after talking online about violence towards the federal government. He was also convicted of making false threats against the federal building. He had claimed he was searching for underground tunnels in the neighborhood that would let him inside the Obama house and other people, and he had a detonator. That was not true. Now, he had been present at the January 6th Capitol riot, as we showed that picture earlier. He got charged with misdemeanors there. He got pardoned before trial. Now, in this case, I say gun charges, right? He's not charged with assassination or attempted assassination. Oh, just some gun charges. You know, we're so used to hearing about guns these days, it's worth taking a moment to drill down on the particularities of a gun possession charge, particularly one like this. These are misdemeanors. It's unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition. So let's take a look at what he was in possession of. Have some photos from the sentencing memorandum. He's got a CZ Scorpion and an M&P pistol. Scorpion had a brace on it, known as a stabilizing brace. I'm no expert on guns, but presumably it's for rapid or repeated firing. And he had hundreds of rounds of ammunition, about 400 rounds of ammo. You know, let's take a moment just to remind ourselves, common sense, right? What does that mean, 400 rounds of ammunition? It could kill 400 people, at least. That's what this guy had in his car in President Obama's neighborhood. And after having made verbal threats that seemed to indicate some hostile intention towards Obama, and after President Trump had posted Obama's purported address in a social media post. Now, what was this guy's characteristics? What had he done on January 6th? Well, he was nearby in that hallway where one of the rioters was shot dead as they tried to breach the passageway towards the chambers. And he's also been sued over the suicide death of Officer Jeffrey Smith, who was seen in footage in a scuffle with Taranto that day. Later, that officer tragically was hit in the head by some object, and he later committed suicide. One of the people who died as a result of the actions that day. Taranto never faced any criminal justice for those actions because Trump pardoned him. And the two career prosecutors that paid a price for telling the truth, let's talk about what they did. In their conviction, in their sentencing memo for his conviction, they talked about the history of this defendant. And as we put up here, they noted the following, quote, on January 6, 2021, thousands of people comprising a mob of rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol while a joint session of Congress met to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. Taranto was accused of participating in the riot in Washington, D.C. by entering the U.S. Capitol building. After the riot, he returned to his home in the state of Washington, where he promoted conspiracy theories about those events. Now, his private messages really reflect the kind of violent thinking he was involved in. Telegram messages saying we have to kill everyone who's going to get in his way. I need you to seek vengeance against them. He says you have to kill or be killed. He also talks about former Vice President Kamala Harris. We can kill her through some redacted circumstances. These are the sorts of things that obviously indicate a very violent type of mindset that this particular defendant had. There's also a live stream he did where he was explaining that he really wanted to get Representative Jamie Raskin all to himself, obviously to do some damage to him. Very relevant factors here. They also mentioned, how did he know to be in that neighborhood? Well, they write this. On June 29th, 2023, then former President Donald Trump published on a social media platform the purported address of former President Barack Obama. Taranto reposted the address on the same platform and thereafter started live streaming from his van on his YouTube channel as he drove around that neighborhood, claiming he was searching for these tunnels, right? He eventually was chased by the United States Secret Service, ran through the woods. He was caught there. Now, you would think this would be very important information to have in the sentencing memorandum. Instead, after submitting this memorandum, these two prosecutors were placed on leave, and a new sentencing memo was filed with these mentions of the January 6th riot and Trump posting the purported address of former President Obama gone, scrubbed clean. No explanation for why that was missing now, and no explanation for the suspension of the two prosecutors. They watched the sentencing from the courtroom. The judge complimented their performance. But we don't need some kind of reason from the Trump administration. The reason's plain enough, that in this Justice Department, prosecutors are not supposed to tell the truth. A glimpse of the truth gets you suspended, and the court record must be purged of the truth, because the Trump DOJ gets it. They know that if you let even a little glimpse of truth come out, it's really dangerous, because people might begin to see through the lies you're trying to perpetuate, the way that you're trying to rewrite history. So that's it for now. We'll keep an eye on what kind of sentence comes down here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.